Welcome to the Educator's Corner podcast, the show where we stay curious for a little bit longer. I'm Kai Basher, and in each episode, I'm joined by innovators from around the world as we explore the challenges, opportunities, and ideas shaping our schools and our communities. And if you'd like more insights and stories, subscribe to Kai Pod News, where I share reflections to keep the conversation going. You'll find the link to sign up in the show notes. Today, we're going to focus on a challenge many educators and parents face around the world: student disengagement with learning and schooling. Joining us is Jenny Anderson, co-author of the Disengaged Teen, alongside Rebecca Winthrop. Jenny brings deep insight into why many young people seem disconnected from their learning and, more importantly, how we can help them move into what she calls explorer mode, where curiosity, agency and meaningful engagement come to life. We're going to be exploring the different modes of student engagement, why engagement matters so much, and strategies that parents and teachers can use to reignite a love of learning. Stay with us for a conversation that promises practical ideas and fresh perspectives to support every learner's journey. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the Educator's Corner podcast. How's your week shaping up?
It's a hell of a week here, I can tell you that. Sending a kid to a new school next week, one kid to a music festival in Reading, and awaiting GCSE results. So lots of big teenage emotions in my house today and this week.
So life is not dull in the Anderson home.
It's not dull. It's never dull. It's never dull.
You led an absolutely brilliant session in conversation with Lord Knight at the Cobus conference in May. And so I'm absolutely delighted that you're here to join us today. And you found time in this very busy schedule, and obviously with your very busy family situation at the moment. But it was a great session at the Cobus conference. And you were talking with Jim about this brilliant book, The Disengaged Teen, which I then have had the joy of reading over the summer holiday and got really deeply engaged.
Glad to hear it.
Absolutely.
Very on brand.
Absolutely. I think Jim, did he warn you not to write a book?
He did. He told me not to write a book. He said nobody reads books.
Yeah, well, they do. I can assure you they do. And it's also, I think it's quite a labour of love, isn't it, writing your book? I've not had the joy yet of writing my own book. But what did inspire you and Rebecca Winthrop to sit down a couple of years ago and put this fantastic piece of work together?
Well, thank you for having me. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. I wrote my first book in 2010 and swore up, down, left and right that I would never, ever, ever write another book again. So I obviously violated that. And the main reason was I had been a finance reporter for 15 years, had been deep in the world of kind of private equity, hedge funds, high finance, worked at the New York Times, but always really interested in human development. I had my own kids. I totally switched lanes, started covering education and parenting, and was just so kind of confused by everything I saw, sort of mental health stats that really, really worried me. I was raising at the time, two little girls, and I was like, what am I heading into? The strong sense of learning was kind of the most fundamental human thing that we do. But what was good learning? Is it good grades? Is it being happy? Is it being successful? And what does success mean? It felt like these questions were so hard to answer. And Rebecca came to me and said, I'm really, really worried that we don't have a good definition of learning today. Do you want to try to write a book about what it is and how we help kids get there? And I said, absolutely not. I am never writing a book again. It was the worst experience ever. And she convinced me. She's very persuasive. So it felt like an important task, and it felt like a hole in the market. There's a lot of books about helping sort of the emotional lives of teens, which I think is important. We relied on that work a lot. And there's a lot of work around school reform and sort of education reform. And we wanted something that crossed those two, that really sort of understood the complex role of schools and families and how to get them working together and give parents just a little bit more of the language and frameworks, all the stuff that you guys live and breathe as educators, zone of proximal development, understanding learning, struggle and push, all of these things. There's a whole language you all speak that parents don't speak, and we wanted to bring that to them. So that was the impetus for writing the book.
And I think that the core of the book is really about student engagement or disengagement. So how would you define that term? I mean, if people are listening out there, parents, quite possibly educators too, what are we thinking about when we're talking about student engagement and student disengagement?
Sure. It's a weirdly complicated term. It's super obvious and it's really complicated. So engagement is what we do with our motivation. So I am motivated to go to the gym, but if I don't actually go to the gym, then I'm not going to get stronger. And I think that is the equivalent in learning is you can be motivated to do better in math, but unless you start doing the work of the homework and getting the help and understanding the challenges you have, then it's not going to happen. So really, the slightly wonkier definition is how we think, feel, act, and initiate in learning. So how we think is the cognitive dimension of engagement. How we feel is the emotional or affective dimension of engagement. How we act is the behavioral, and that is kind of the one that parents get the best. Kids are behaving badly. They think they're not engaged. They're really studying hard. They are engaged. It's not that simple, unfortunately. It's this interplay of how they think, feel, act, and also initiate. And this is really the agency piece. We'll get into this, but how much ownership are they taking? How much of their own interests are they using to drive things? How much are they making an effort to make sure a teacher knows that they're confused or don't understand something? That initiation part is also, it's this fourth dimension of engagement, which is very important. It's really kind of come into the literature in the past 10, 15 years that agency is a really, agentic engagement is the critical component of success. So when kids are cognitively, effectively, behaviorally, and agentically engaged, they perform better in school, they feel better, their mental health outcomes are much better, and they're more pro-social, they have better pro-social outcomes. So it really is the predictor of what we would call good learning. May not be the predictor of good grades, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Okay, I'm sure we will. So you and Rebecca, in your book, The Disengaged Teen, you state that student disengagement is one of the most pressing challenges, if not the most pressing challenge educators face today. What makes you both think that?
The data's terrible. So we did quite a bit of research. We surveyed 68,000 kids, nationally representative survey. This is in the U.S., but we've looked at the data globally, and it sadly mirrors it. So in elementary school, sort of call it third grade, which is maybe year 4 in British parlance, 75% of kids say they love school, and that's a fairly good proxy for engagement. It's not perfect, but it's very good. By 11th grade, year 12, 25% of kids say that. And how kids feel about school and their learning deeply affects how they perform and how they feel about themselves as learners. So we really do, and we face this cliff. Basically, when kids move from elementary school or primary school into secondary school, there is this massive drop-off of engagement. So there's just kind of the pure data. That's number one. I would say number 2 is look at the mental health stats. Look at the chronic absenteeism stats that we see all around the world. They were pretty bad before COVID. They are much worse after COVID. So we've really seen the social contract kind of breaking. I would argue broken. And then you have AI kind of coming at us like a freight train. So we have all of these things that are kind of conspiring, either sort of technology writ large, but also AI working to kind of distract and shift kids' attention. So we really do have a disengagement crisis. Kids aren't going to school. If they are in school, a lot of them are extremely unhappy. And we have technology that's changing what it means to learn and what is going to be needed in the workplace. So all of those things kind of paint a portrait of a very different time than, say, maybe the 80s or 90s, where you think you don't like school, well, you'll get to the other side of it and you'll be fine. You'll get a job, it'll all be okay. Doesn't quite feel that way. It has got the disengagement crisis itself has gotten worse, and the world into which the disengaged learners are going is dramatically different.
One of the things that I took away from your talk at the COBUS conference, and then which I was really pleased to delve into much more deeply in the book itself, is this idea of the 4 different modes of engagement that you and Rebecca have come up with, which I think is really, really helpful for our listeners out there. So can you briefly explain the 4 different modes of engagement that you identify in the Disengaged Teen?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, as you say, there's four different modes. We found that kids turn up in these modes. These are not identities. We are not pigeonholing kids. We are not trying to slap labels or identities on them. These are very dynamic modes that kids go into based on how they feel, their environments, sort of things that are happening in their lives. So they are very dynamic. And we also find that kids get stuck in them. And so really the book is about how when they get stuck in one, we can get them unstuck. So the 4 modes are passenger mode, which is these are kids who are coasting along. They're doing the bare minimum. They'll race through their homework. They will take any shortcut they can. They will often ask for instructions from teachers, but it's really almost to know just exactly what they need to do so they can get through it. They don't want to do a centimeter more than is asked of them. This is about more than 50% of kids told us that they spend most of their time in passenger mode, so sort of doing the bare minimum. We have achiever mode, which is really high levels of engagement, but very low levels of agency. So these are kids who are aiming to get a gold star in everything put in front of them. These are the A-star students. Teachers love them and parents love them. And it's a really, really tricky category because there are happy achievers, and those are the kids who are doing really well. They're organized, they're self-motivated, they're goal-orientated, they're organized, they're on it. If that's the profile, that's wonderful. Keep going. What we have found and what the research shows is that a shocking number of kids tip into unhappy achiever mode, which is it is success at all costs. It sort of masks a deep fragility, a fear of risk-taking, wanting to cut corners, huge amounts of cheating in achiever mode because you need to get the grade and you'll do anything to get the grade. And really alarmingly, these kids have the highest levels of mental health challenges because they've internalized that they are only worth their grades or achievements or, college admissions. And that really is very poor for their mental health. So that's achiever mode. Resistor mode is the kids who withdraw and act out. Everybody knows the resistor. These are the dubbed to the problem kids in the system. I think teachers and, adults sort of that work with kids would know them more as kids with problems. Something is going on. Something is causing them to really retreat within themselves or to behave very poorly. It is very challenging for teachers because they are distracting for the rest of the kids. They take up a lot of sort of behavioral management time in a classroom. They're very hard for parents. You feel like a failure. You feel like you've done something wrong. And every other kid seems to just go to school and perform and yours doesn't. So resistor mode it's a smaller percentage of kids. The good news is these kids have agency. They are letting you know with everything they have that things are not working for them. It is not it is not constructive, but it is a signal. And so when these kids are turned in the right direction, when they're sort of turned toward their learning instead of against it, they can really catapult into explorer mode, which is the final mode, which is really where, as you say, curiosity meets drive, where kids have a sense of who they are, what they want, and they have a set of strategies to go after things. When things go wrong, they don't melt down, they don't fall apart. They adapt, they pivot, they move on. There's a real sort of internal drive to them, and that is where we want kids to spend more time. Our research showed that kids told us that they get to show up in explorer mode less than 4% of the time in middle school and high school or in secondary school. So I think both parents and educators have a tall task in front of them trying to create more explorer moments.
So passenger mode is the most common from the research. So how many students did you say are typically in passenger mode?
More than 50%.
More than 50% in high school, in secondary school, more than 50% are in passenger mode. So what makes you think that passenger mode is the most prevalent of all these modes in our classrooms around the world?
Yeah. So, I mean, the data show that it's more than 50%, so it is the largest category by far. When we talked to educators about the modes and we were sort of testing them in some of the initial phases, they immediately recognized them as the invisible middle in a classroom. So not the sort of super high achievers who often absorb a lot of energy in a classroom or the resistors who often absorb a lot of energy in the classroom. It's the ones who sit in the middle and they are doing enough to get by and not cause a lot of attention, but they are they're completely disengaged from their learning. They are not cognitively or emotionally engaged, but they are behaviorally engaged. So they are doing that kind of bare minimum. One educator had this incredibly powerful phrase to us when we were reporting. She said, for the first 10 years of teaching, I thought passenger mode meant I was succeeding as a teacher because they weren't acting out. But I now realize that I understand engagement, just sitting and complying and doing everything I ask at a sort of bare minimum level. That's not the game here. That's not what we're trying to get these kids to do. We need them to do a lot more than that. So it's tricky because as a teacher, you're balancing so much. There's so many kids in the classroom. There's so many standards. There's a lot to do. But the main reasons kids told us that they were in passenger mode was they were outside their zone of proximal development. They were either overwhelmed or they were bored to tears. The content was too easy for them, so they checked out. They were completely overwhelmed and they checked out. Way easier for an adolescent to not try and fail than to try and fail. So 100%, that was a choice. They couldn't always articulate it, but the more you got into it, why do you act the way you do? We have a character named Stella in the book who literally explains to us how by noon every single day she had been in every single one of the modes. And, in English class, she just did not feel she could ever be a success in English. She always got her essays back with a lot of red ink. Her friends were better writers than her. She was always struggling to understand the text. And so she had decided she wasn't a very good English student. So she just decided she wasn't going to try very hard. So that was a sort of choice she had made. And so she was in passenger mode. She did the absolute bare minimum. Her teacher would give her papers back with comments and say, you can do this to improve. And she didn't believe she could improve. And she didn't believe that her teacher wanted her to improve. And so she didn't try. So that's a sort of an example of a kid in passenger mode. One other thing I would say about passenger mode is the most frequent phrase we heard from kids, in particular boys, was boring. How's school? Boring. What are you doing? Nothing. What are you learning? Nothing. Tell us more. It's stupid, right? That boring was this incredibly broad term that when we broke it down really meant I can't do it. It's not interesting to me. It's not relevant to me. No one's explained to me why this matters. So there was a relevance piece. There was clearly a self-efficacy piece, which was really profound. And those are kind of the two main reasons that we found that kids were in passenger mode.
You mentioned that a couple of times. What might sound to listeners, some of our listeners, fairly technical, edgy speak, perhaps zone of proximal development. Can you just slow down a little bit?
Sure.
And maybe just explain what that is and how that might help us get passengers more engaged in their learning, a better understanding of that.
I found this concept when I first found it, 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years ago. It was like the lightning bulb of all lightning bulbs as a parent. So the zone of proximal development, as our favorite Soviet psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, came up with this term. And the zone of proximal development is essentially the sweet spot of learning where a child is stretched but not overwhelmed. And with help, with scaffolding from either a teacher or technology or a parent, they can really take off. The challenge is trying to figure out where that spot is. That requires really good communication. It requires the child being honest. I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? It requires that a teacher or a parent, sort of have the patience and time to say, if you don't, I can explain it. I can help you get there. This is where technology holds a lot of promise, right? It can really help kids find their zone of proximal development, find those holes in their learning. But with that support and stretch, kids can soar. And again, it's just adolescence is this period of just supreme self-awareness and self-consciousness. So you do not want to take a risk that you do not need to take socially. Raising your hand. Kids told us time and time again, the only time I raise my hand in class is when I know the answer. And we were like, what? What about if you have a question? And they were like, oh, no, you never ask a question when you don't know the answer, because that's admitting that you don't know the answer. So it's, there's this real sort of evaluation going on. And so classrooms that feel deeply supported, where you can ask a question, where you can go to your teacher, where you can ask a peer, where it's okay to not know the answer, is where you can get into that zone of proximal development. Because, with little kids, they'll just say, I don't get it, I don't know, and it's okay. For some reason, in that early, especially sort of 10 to 14 early adolescence, they do not want to let on. So you really have to create that tremendous safety in the classroom where they can get into the zone of proximal development so you can stretch them. So we really love the work of David Yeager. Lev Vygotsky is the person who coined this term, but really David Yeager is very articulate in terms of understanding that kids just thrive when they have very high expectations, but deep levels of support. And I think that also intersects with this idea of the zone of proximal development, that those two things can both be true. As a parent, you can set very high expectations, but you can also just be there to try to help them get there. And if they feel supported, they can take risks on behalf of their learning that will allow them to stretch even further. But if you set the high expectations and there's no support, they feel like they could flail, so they're not going to get on that ladder, right? Or if you set expectations really low and offer a lot of support, there's just nowhere to go. There's nowhere for them to stretch. And so it's tricky, and it's also exciting, because to realize that when you say that, you're like, oh, right, some of the toughest things I've done in my life, I've done because it was a crazy, audacious, ambitious goal, but I also knew I had a team of people who were going to help me get there. And that's sort of that's what happens in classrooms every day.
Yeah, so it sounds like you could summarize that as sort of high challenge or high expectation, but also high support.
Yes, yes.
And I guess for every student or every child at any given time, that could be quite different and quite personalized.
Totally.
And so I would then imagine that agency plays a big part in then the student getting into that zone, because it's quite difficult if you've got 24, 25, 30 students and you're trying to, as a teacher on your own, trying to find every individual's zone of proximal development at any one time. But if you've managed, like I say, to create the support and the safety, but also the agency, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But if the students have got agency and they've got involvement in their learning and they can help to find that themselves, they're just not waiting for the teacher to provide that for them. I think that can maybe one of the principles or strategies that you can work with as a parent or an educator.
Absolutely. Just simply the ability to say, I need help, is really probably one of the most profound acts of agency that we can, that a child can exercise, really, because that is saying, I recognize the thing I don't understand and I'm asking for help to get it. That's like, in the metacognitive world, that's two big pieces.
Thank you for listening to the Educator's Corner podcast. It's been inspiring to see so many new listeners join us and connect with these conversations. Your support helps us bring on influential guests, dive deeper into critical topics, and amplify the voices shaping education's future. If you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It makes a huge difference to me and the team. Thank you. So on to the second one, achiever mode. Why might not achiever mode always be the gold standard? I mean, that sounds great, doesn't it? Achievers, they're going to get grades, they're going to do really well. What are the concerns about achiever mode? Can you just unpack that a little bit more, please, Jenny?
Sure. I mean, there are a few big challenges. Challenge number one is mental health challenges. It is anxiety and depression. So those are sort of off the charts for young people now. And a lot of that is coming from a place of the system itself is quite insatiable in terms of the demands it puts on young people. And for kids who have internalized that their goal is to meet the system's top standard, there's no end to it. One of the classic signs of an unhappy achiever is a kid who is not sleeping nearly enough. And they don't sleep enough because, sleep is productivity. Well, sleep to a developing teen brain is absolutely essential. It is essential for mental health. It is also essential for academic performance. So achiever mode kids get constant feedback that everything they're doing is good because they're getting good grades. So everybody loves those good grades, and teachers love the good grades, and parents love the good grades. So what they're doing is getting a positive feedback loop that they're doing everything just right. And what's fascinating is John Marshall Reeve, who's done a lot of research into agentic engagement, will tell you of kids in achiever mode, when you ask them what they care about, what they like, what they want to dig into, they have no answer. They don't know because they're so busy answering the demands of the system. They're not spending any time figuring out who they are or what they want. And we argue in the book, and I think most of us in education and parenting would argue, a pretty primary goal of adolescence is to figure out who you are. It is also hopefully to perform well, but it is first and foremost to figure out who you are and what direction you want to go in. And if the sort of cost of performing all the time is not having the ability to do that, that is a real risk, and kids are burning out as a result of that. So the mental health challenges are a key one. Sleep is a key signal to be looking at. Fear of failure. So you get a 98 and you're crushed, devastated because you got one question wrong or you got one off the mark. Not a great sign. Always good to be pushing yourself and saying, how could I do better? But if you're never able to take stock of any success and nothing is ever good enough, obviously this is just perfectionism on steroids, right? We are seeing this rise in what's called socially prescribed perfectionism, which is sort of just making sure everybody can keep up with everybody else, right? Obviously, social media has made that worse. So we're just seeing a huge uptick in that. And this is all centralized in sort of the achiever mode mentality. So I guess one other cost to achiever mode, and I think it's very relevant in the conversation about AI, is creativity. If you were always trying to get the right answer, you were never going to be exploring sort of creative answers and never developing that sense of sort of creative possibility, right? You're always just trying to get the answer that somebody has for you versus coming up with a new way of doing things. So one thing we noticed was kids, when given the opportunity to do things on their own or outside the system, had no idea what to do. Let's spend a day doing something you like. Well, it's like, but what, can you just tell me what to do? Can you tell me what I need to, what hoop do I need to jump through? Because that's what I need to do. Well, if you think about what AI can do now, AI can do a lot, almost everything, right? Which means that you're going to need to have kids who know what they want to do and what they're going to go after to work with AI to be able to do that. But if all you're doing is answering the system, AI is going to be able to do a lot of that on its own. So that's the sort of the downside of achiever mode. Obviously, there's also a lot of, positives. That's why we have the happy achiever and unhappy achiever sort of distinction, because obviously if you're pushing yourself hard, you're getting good grades, you're organized, you're goal orientated, those are all great things. And we really want to encourage those things.
We'll look beyond achiever mode in a moment when we go on to explorer mode. But before that, let's just explore resistor mode a little more. What drives a student into resistor mode, would you say? What are some common drivers to take a kid into resistor mode?
Yeah. So a lot of neurodivergence, undiagnosed neurodivergence. So kids internalize the story that they're stupid because they struggle to do things that other kids seem to be able to do really easily. So that's definitely one. Mental health challenges is another, right? There's just a sort of the struggles with mental health problems is causing a sort of, is making it harder to kind of sort of behave or, be present in a classroom in a constructive way. Bullying, we found, was a huge one. And home problems. Those were kind of the four main reasons why kids ended up in resistor mode. And this would be, or just overwhelm. We have the character, there's a boy named Pranav in our book who, was just a really happy, super creative, productive kid with friends in elementary school, did super well. He was in a gifted and talented program in the US. Middle school comes along. His friends get into the gifted and talented program. He didn't. And it started this sort of spiral downward. He didn't quite know why he didn't end up in the program. He could see that he wasn't, like, the teaching wasn't as good. The learning environment wasn't as interesting. He decided that he would just stay. He started to develop test anxiety. He would stay home. He convinced his mom he was sick. He then stopped going to school. And then he was, very, very depressed. And so this sort of spiral started. And when it took years for people to get to, it all sort of harked back to this idea that he had been excluded from, he was in a club and then he was out of the club, and no one really ever took the time to say, oh, this is literally like an administrative issue, right? But it started this spiral of a story of I'm not good enough, and then searching for the evidence that I'm not good enough, finding the evidence, and then building, well, I'm not good enough, so why would I go to school? I'm not good enough to take a test, so I won't go to school. I'm not good enough, I don't have any friends, so I'm not going to go to school. So it really took sort of an adult show. He said, people would show up all the time and say, how are you going to catch up? And it would just overwhelm him even more because he knew how far behind he was. And so he would check out even more. And finally, someone showed up and said, what's going on with you? How can I help you? It was amazing that the system kind of came at him for his deficiencies and his defectiveness instead of coming at him and saying, what do you need? What's going on here? Why are you doing this? And one of the things we talk about in the book is really trying to it's the hardest thing in the world because these kids feel like they're just defying you and the system at all odds. And you can't, obviously, we can't condone, we can't live in a system where there's no consequences for bad behavior. And yet these kids often really need deep levels of support.
Okay. Now, when you introduced resistor mode earlier in the conversation, you talked about one of the positives about resistor mode is that students in resistor mode very often have agency.
Yeah.
And does that mean then that it might be easier to work with a child who's in resistor mode than one who's in passenger mode because they've got agency?
I mean, as every teacher will know listening to this and every educator, I mean, every kid is completely different. This kid that I'm talking about right now honestly went on to become a national school representative for his school and then for the state. And then he went on to found a national organization that was investigating the question of gifted and talented program guidelines. Like what were the guidelines? He was shocked to learn that one of the guidelines were your parents have to send in a letter of recommendation. His mother was not in a place to be able to do that. And so he was penalized for that. Well, that's just a ridiculous policy. And so he found that out and he took it on. So he had this ability, from that deep resistor mode experience to then really just say, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to take all this energy and point it to trying to make the thing right. And passenger mode you really do internalize this system. And not as many people are rushing to the rescue of passenger mode in the same way that they might with resistor mode. And so the challenge with passenger mode isn't that the kid themselves can't get out of the mode. It's that nobody's paying attention. They're doing just well enough. Maybe they're the BC student. And so the parents annoyed thinking you should do better, but they're not calling in the cavalry because doesn't look horribly wrong. Versus the resistor mode where things are looking really dark and suddenly there's this kind of all hands on deck. Let's get this thing turned around. The challenge is, does the system have the resources to do that for every kid in passenger mode? It doesn't, which is why we need sort of radical school redesign.
Let's move into the sunny uplands of Explorer mode. What are some real world signs that a student has reached Explorer mode?
When you see it, they want to talk about what they're doing. They want to talk about what they're learning. They ask a lot of questions. They're super annoying. They will be obsessed with tornadoes, or they'll be obsessed with sustainable fashion. And that's all they want to talk about. And they are looking online for everything they can do to learn more or to do more. They're looking for people to talk to about it. They are trying to direct the conversation in the classroom towards the thing that they're interested in, which is their way of sort of exhibiting their agency, right? Sort of saying you're having a conversation about, cells. And it's like, can we bring this back to weather? It's like, well, it's really not the topic right now, but this is it's the sort of bubbling over of interest and excitement around a topic. And some initiative around it, initiatives supported by another adult, initiatives supported by technology. Those are kind of the classic Explorer signs. And we've seen it in the book. We have a lot of different case studies, but one, I can just give you one. One was a kid who was really very disengaged, skipping school, had fallen in with the wrong crowd. Parents didn't speak English. So, the teachers they would send notes home saying, you're not coming to class. And the parents would say, what's going on? And the son would say, that's not really what it says. I mean, he was just sort of gaming the whole system. And he ended up in a robotics class that for him, just sitting still in a chair and doing academic abstract work was not helpful for him, but building something was. And he loved this robotics class and he got really into it and he started building things. And then he saw the relevance of math because it fed into the robotics, and he saw the relevance of science because it fed into something he was doing. And he was kind of willing to coast by in English because he didn't want to get in trouble because he wanted to be able to keep doing this thing. So it has that finding that one thing, a thing, not one thing, a thing that sort of captures your attention, can spill over into these other things and can sort of help build just what is an internal motivation that can be applied to other things.
In the first part of the book, you go into even more depth with these different modes. So if you really want to check out the Disengaged Teen, we've captured your interest, then the first part of the book goes through each of those modes in a lot more detail and gives you a lot more characteristics and so on. But then in the second half of the book, you start to dig into some of the strategies, which is really, I think, helpful. That's, key strategies to encourage, say, explorer mode. And we haven't got time to go through all of them today, but I just want to pick up a couple which I think are really important, and they're all really important. But first of all, what I might call mindful talk, how we communicate as a parent with our young people, with our children, or how as teachers we communicate with our students. How important is the communication piece here, do you think, Jenny? And can you give us some pointers of something, one or two things we can think about in how we communicate with young people?
Sure. So a framework we really loved, again, was John Marshall Reeves' autonomy supportive teaching. And there is a whole framework for autonomy supportive parenting. But basically, it's sort of 7 sets of practices. And with these, his research has shown that in classrooms, this is 35 randomized controlled trials in 14 countries, consistently showing that when teachers shift their practice in these 7 ways, kids perform better, feel better, and have more pro-social outcomes. And the number one thing in that is invitational language. So instead of do this because I told you, which is maybe common parent talk, we do homework because we're trying to consolidate our learning, and homework can be really tough and boring. And I know you've been in school all day. It's been a really long day. I hear you saying that you're tired and you don't want to do it. As soon as you've said that, you've disarmed the kids, so that both acknowledgement, validation of the feelings that a child is having. I'm frustrated, I'm bored, I'm angry, I don't want to do this. And explanatory rationale, invitational language, all of those components together totally disarm what can escalate into a confrontation. So I don't want to study for my math test. Math is stupid. Ugh, I totally get that. I often have things from work that I really wish I didn't have to do when I get home. I have to work for 8 hours and I have to come home and I have to write another email. I mean, it's so boring. I get it. It stinks. But this math test is really important because if you miss this concept, the next couple concepts are going to be really hard. So is there something I could do to help you? Is there a strategy that we could devise together to help you get through tonight? Could we break it down into 3 little chunks? Should we do maybe 3 15-minute periods set aside? You're helping them strategize and get over that obstacle, which is clearly they've got a big negative emotion in front of them, right? Maybe they want to play with their friends. I get that. I want to hang out with my friends. I want to have a glass of wine. I want to watch TV. I want to do all these things. Humor, disarming with kind of invitational language just goes a long way. Teens do not want to be judged. And this is one of the trickiest things about having teenagers, is they feel judged and they do not feel listened to. And if you can try, both as educators and as parents, to not judge, even when you are feeling so judgy, because they give us plenty of reasons to be very judgy, you got to just set it aside, because you're not going to get where you want them to be or where they want to get themselves by judging them. I can't believe you never organize your papers. Like, to a teenager, that is just like, fuel for, the fire to get out of the house and not do the thing you want them to do. Versus, ooh, gosh, it's tough to get organized for a test when everything's disorganized. What can we do to help you? What would be useful? Is there anything I could do? Do you want to just set aside 5 minutes? You can help pepper in the strategies, but then they have to pick them. So I really think these 7 practices, and they're all outlined in the book, but I'd say the most important really is validation of feelings. So what John Marshall Reeves teachers would do when they would come up and say, I don't want to do this. I hear you saying you don't want to do this. Just repeated, I hear you saying you don't want to do this assignment. I understand that it's hard, but I believe that you have the capacity to do it. Why don't we give you a couple choices? So choice was another very important element. I'm going to give you 2 different ways that you can do this assignment. You can do this problem set right here, or you could go online and do this problem set here. Which of those appeals to you? That ability to exercise just a tiny bit of agency, a tiny bit of choice, makes the kid feel powerful, makes them want to do it a little bit more. So again, sort of validation, explanatory rationale, and invitational language, and a little bit of choice. I get that every teacher can't give every kid 30 options. That's just not realistic. That's not the way a classroom works. And it's not impossible to design things with a few choices in mind recognizing that these kids want a chance to exercise some agency and choice.
A phrase that I hadn't come across until I read your book was agentic engagement. And you've mentioned that a few times in our conversation. So that's something else you talk about quite a lot in the book, agency and agentic engagement. So just unpack that a little bit. And how can that work for parents or educators to try and move students into this explorer mode?
Sure. So we define agency as the ability to set a meaningful goal and marshal the resources to meet it. And when you unpack that phrase, there's a lot in there. The ability to set a meaningful goal means I know who I am, I know what I care about, and I know a goal that I want to meet. This does not mean I know my career. This isn't about I know I want to get 9s on my GCSEs. This is about I want to improve in science, or I want to be a member of the varsity football team, or I want to be on the first team, right? It can be any goal. I have a goal that's meaningful to me, and I can marshal the resources, which means I can go seek support and build a team or single, or on my own, go after this goal, and I can adapt, which means I have strategies that I deploy. So when things don't go my way, I can pivot and I can change directions. Agentic engagement is just that. It is having the initiative to want to set your own goals and to be able to go after them. So and again, it comes back to, it's not just a set of thoughts. It's not, I want to do these things. It's not just a set of actions, because the actions have to be tied to the thoughts. And it's not just behavior. It's that interplay of the three and the decision to set a goal for yourself and to go after it. And when we think about what we're trying to do as parents, we're trying to help our kids become decision makers and action takers and thinkers too, of course, but not just thinkers, right? We don't just want them to be able to do well on a math test. We want them to be able to take whatever it is they're learning in math and go do something with it in the world. And so that takes practice, that agency, that exercising the ability to make a choice. And by the way, make the wrong choice tons of times. I mean, this goes without saying that your kid will make a million bad decisions with the agency we give them. That is the entire, I love the phrase, life's not a dress rehearsal. For teenagers, it is literally a dress rehearsal. They are practicing identities. They are trying things on. They are trying on. They are practicing for what is going to be the real world. And so they have to mess up. And so we give them this agency so that they can practice and mess up and start to figure out a path for themselves versus telling them this is the path you need to go on and then watching them comply and just get in line and go. What we want is someone who's going to go out there and have the initiative to say, I don't like the way this project is going, or I don't think we've set the right goal for this project. I think we should go in a different direction. That's agency.
If there was one thing that you'd like to share about technology and or AI and how this has affected this whole piece of work that you've written such a wonderful book about, what would that one thing be that you want to share about tech and disengagement?
I think if we don't use AI wisely and we don't encourage technology companies to design AI wisely, we will end up with more passengers. The technology can do a lot of stuff that kids don't want to do because it's hard. So writing a paper, if AI can do it for you, there is going to be a temptation to let AI do it for them. So what we need to be teaching for in our homes and in our schools is the motivation to want to do the hard work of writing the draft in the first place and making that draft better. Maybe with AI, right? AI can totally help you, but either, hey, I need you to take a first stab at that first draft, because writing a first draft is actually a skill we all need. It's horrible to look at a blank page and have to start on it, but that's a skill. It's about sort of gathering your sort of core messy thoughts and getting them on paper. And then we're going to use AI to improve those and to give us some more ideas. And then we're going to go back and we're going to work on the draft that we come back with it. But we have to be designing and talking about the core motivation for wanting to do the hard work of thinking and writing and learning. Because if we don't get to the motivation piece, the technology can do everything for them. And if it's there, it's accessible. It's commercially accessible. This is not an app we need to download. It is everywhere. And so I really think parents need to be talking about AI with their kids. I think they should be asking them what they're using in a non-judgmental way. What are you using? What are you finding? Where is it helpful? Where does it hallucinate? Where is it inaccurate? how are you making sure that you learn the stuff versus just letting the technology do it for you? That's a really good, open, honest question to have, but don't do it in such a way that you're judging your kid. I mean, all the research shows that kids are using AI and not talking to their parents about it because they're afraid they're going to be judged. So I think we need to have a conversation about it. And schools obviously have a big task in terms of figuring out how they're going to do teaching and learning with it, and then communicating that to parents so parents can support it at home. This really has to be a partnership agreement because kids are home a lot of the time. They're on their devices all the time. So they need guidance. They feel totally in the dark about what to communicate to their kids. So I really think that's a big part of the conversation. We sort of dropped the ball. I think most adults would agree we didn't do a great job on the first round of tech on social media and gaming. We were kind of like, it'll probably be okay. Didn't turn out to be the case. And so on this new technology, let's start having the conversations. Let's try to get a handle on it. Let's work with schools. Let's work with teachers and really get it all out in the open so that the questions are kind of on the table and not sort of all being done under the table.
Absolutely. And I think it's, how can we help young people and educators and parents to use AI so it deepens the learning and not just making the learning much more superficial? If there was one takeaway that might encourage more parents and more educators to engage with this book and what's in there, what would that one key takeaway be that you think the book offers?
One of the most important conversations you're going to have with your child for their entire lives is who they are as learners and how they're going to learn better, how they're always going to get better at learning. Because if you're good at learning, you can do anything. You'll be ready for any job. It doesn't really matter what technology comes down the road. You're a good learner. So if you want to get better at learning, if you want to understand what good learning is and get better at learning, read the book.
And there's great research behind the book, but what you've also got throughout the book, there's quite a lot of examples about how you can talk to young people, whether you're a parent or an educator. And I really like those. It's some really practical, this is how you could say this. And there's quite a long piece about, going beyond how was school today. And I think that was really helpful because as parents, I mean, I'm a parent, you're a parent. It's really easy. How was school today? Fine, boring. And you give some really interesting alternatives to create that conversation. So I think there's some fantastic theory. There's some fantastic practice and tips. So if listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work and book and the Disengaged Teen, where should they go?
So the disengagedteen.com is everything you can find about the book. There's an interview guide. There's a study guide. You can, of course, buy the book. And if you want to follow me, I write quite a bit about some of the ideas in the book, slightly more digestible on my Substack, which is How to Be Brave. And my co-author, Rebecca Winthrop, has a wonderful LinkedIn newsletter called Winthrop's World of Education. So you can find, we've got social media handles. All of that stuff's on our website, thedisengagedteen.com. You've got Rebecca's writing. You've got my Substack. So there's all sorts of places you can keep up the conversation. We love coming into schools. We love talking to parents. We do book club. We do online book clubs all the time, often with parents in schools. So the school will facilitate a book club conversation with parents. And that's great because then we just have a conversation about what parents are thinking about and what they're worried about. And we love to kind of create that dynamic feedback loop where we're hearing what people are thinking about. So any of those things are on the table.
Okay. Well, thank you for ignoring Lord Knight's advice. And for you and Jenny, you and Rebecca writing this book, it's fantastic. I think it really helps shift our thinking, whether we're parents, whether we're educators. It really helps shift our thinking. And I think we do need to reshape education. The world is changing rapidly. And I think this is a really helpful piece of work to help that reshaping of education as the world changes so rapidly. So thank you, Jenny, for your time today. Thank you for all the work you've put into this. It's a really great piece of work, and hope the rest of your week goes smoothly.
I need some good luck now. Thanks for having me.
All the best.
It was a pleasure to talk to you.
You take care, Jenny. Thank you. You've been listening to the Educator's Corner podcast with me, Kai Vasher. This show is created by British School Muscat and British School Salala, with post-production by Communicating for Impact. For updates and insights, remember, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Kai Pod News. Simply follow the link in the show notes to sign up. Until next time, stay curious.